What is freedom when your body is still bent to the same fields, and your hands bleed on the same cotton that once bound you in chains? The morning broke like it always did in Mississippi, with the cry of a rooster cutting through the heavy dampness of the air. Elijah stirred on his straw-stuffed mattress, his bones aching from the day before. The shanty where he slept was no home, just for rotting planks of wood nailed together, with cracks so wide he could see the pale streak of dawn pressing through. The air smelled of mildew and old sweat, a smell that never quite left him. He rose slowly, pulling on the same faded shirt, its collar frayed from years of wear. Outside, voices mumbled low, other workers already gathering, their shadows stretching long in the half-light. The overseer's horn had not yet sounded, but nobody dared wait for it. The landowner called this freedom sharecropping. They named it as if some miracle had been done for black folk. Elijah knew the truth. What they shared was the cotton, the sweat, and the hunger. The profit never reached their hands. As Elijah stepped into the yard, his eyes swept across the rows of cabins. Children shuffled barefoot in the dirt, their bellies thin, their faces still sticky from sleep. Mothers tied rags around their heads, preparing to carry babies on their hips while picking. Old men leaned on sticks, their bodies nearly finished, yet still demanded to work. It was the same life Elijah had known since he was a boy, before freedom and after. The horn finally wailed, sharp and ugly. Slicing through the quiet morning, the overseer Harlan emerged on horseback, tall in the saddle, whip curled in his hand like a second tongue. His eyes narrowed, his lips curled back into a smile that was not a smile at all. Up. All of you up. Sun's already waiting on you, he barked. Cotton don't pick itself. The workers moved in silence, heads low. Elijah followed, his bare feet stirring the dust as they made their way toward the endless stretch of fields. The horizon looked like it had no end, just white bowls stretching farther than the eye could carry. The sight of it always made his stomach sink. So much cotton, so much pain. As he bent into the first row, Elijah's hands trembled. The cotton plant looked soft from afar, but up close it was cruel. Its sharp edges tore skin, leaving small cuts that stung with sweat. He worked carefully, stuffing the sack that dragged from his shoulder. With every bowl plucked, he felt the weight grow heavier. The sun climbed higher, merciless. By noon, his shirt clung wet to his back. Harlan's horse paced up and down the rows, the overseer watching for any sign of weakness. Every so often, the whistle of the whip cracked the air, not always striking. Sometimes just a warning, but always enough to make the workers flinch. Elijah thought of his mother then. He could almost hear her voice, soft and tired, whispering. In the cabin years ago, one day, boy, you'll see a sky with no master watchin'. One day your hands will work for you. She was gone now, her body buried under the magnolia tree behind the cabins. She had worked herself thin, died younger than her years. But her words clung to him, a seed buried in the soil of his heart. Keep moving, boy, Harlan's voice thundered. Elijah jerked back to the field, his hand moving quicker. He dared not raise his eyes. The whip cracked, striking the ground so near his feet the dirt spat up into his legs. His chest tightened, but he kept working. That was the rule. Swallow the anger, bury it deep, let it rot inside before it ever reached your lips. By dusk, his sack dragged heavy, shoulders burning from the weight. He dropped it onto the scales near the barn, where another white man recorded numbers into a ledger. The man did not look at him, only at the weight of cotton, as if Elijah himself did not exist. Not enough, the man muttered. You're fallin' behind. Elijah bit his tongue until he tasted blood. It's not enough. It was never enough. The cotton kept growing, and the debt kept growing, and the hunger kept growing. When the day finally ended, Elijah trudged back to the cabins, his legs trembling beneath him. The workers ate from tin plates beans, if they were lucky. Cornbread so hard it scraped the mouth. He sat near the fire, staring into the flames, his body numb with exhaustion. Around him voices hummed, soft hymns, songs of sorrow turned into prayer. Elijah closed his eyes. He saw again the cotton fields, endless and white, like snow that never melted. He wondered if freedom would ever come, or if it was only a story mothers told their sons before death took them. And as he drifted to sleep on the hard ground, he whispered to himself, almost without knowing, "I am still not free." The night air was thick with the smell of damp earth and smoke from the fires outside the cabins. Elijah sat with his plate balanced on his knees, though his stomach ached with hunger. The beans were watery, and the cornbread was dry, but he ate slowly, forcing it down. Around him, men and women murmured quietly, their voices tired from the day. Children slept curled in their mothers' laps, their small breaths uneven, their ribs visible through thin shirts. Beside Elijah sat Isaiah, younger man, barely 20, with a restless fire always burning in his eyes. His hands were raw and bleeding, but he grinned through the pain as if smiling could trick the world into kindness. "You see Harlan today?" Isaiah muttered, leaning close. His voice was low, cautious. Had his whip out every 5 minutes, like the devil himself. "Keeping him company." Elijah nodded, but did not look up. "Saw." Isaiah chuckled, though there was no joy in it. "Ain't one day he'll get what's coming. Can't nobody live with that much hate in their belly and not choke on it." Elijah finally raised his eyes, his voice flat. "Harlan's been living on hate his whole life. Hate feeds him better than bread." Isaiah stared into the fire. "Still, I dream sometimes. Think about walking away. Think about the road stretching north, all the way where a man might breathe, without begging for it." The words made Elijah's chest tighten. He had dreamed too, when he was Isaiah's age. But dreams had teeth they'd bit when reality woke you. "Dreaming's dangerous," Elijah said quietly. "Don't let nobody hear you speak of it, or they'll take the skin off your back." Isaiah smirked. "They already talking the skin. What else they got left?" Before Elijah could answer, an older woman approached the fire, her steps slow, her back bent with years of labor. It was Ruth, her gray hair tied in a scarf, her eyes sharp despite her frail body. She carried a small tin cup of water mixed with herbs, scent of mint and pine drifting from it. "Let me see your hands, boy," she said, settling down beside Isaiah. Isaiah obeyed, stretching out his raw palms. Ruth dipped a cloth into the water and pressed it gently against his cuts. Isaiah winced, then sighed with relief. "Plant'll tear you apart if you let it," Ruth muttered. "Don't let the blood fester. It won't care if your hands rot right off." Isaiah grinned at her. "Thank you, Miss Ruth. You always know what to do." Ruth's eyes softened for a moment. "I know how to keep folk alive, that's all." She turned to Elijah. "And you? You keep working like a mule, but your eyes look dead. You need to keep something alive in there, or the field will take you whole." Elijah met her gaze but said nothing. Words stuck like stones in his throat. That night, as the fire burned low, someone began humming a hymnslow, steady, almost like a heartbeat. The tune wove through the cabins, carrying sorrow but also something else. Defiance, faint but steady. Elijah lay back, eyes closed, listening. The sound carried him to memories of his mother's voice, singing the same hymn while combing his hair when he was small. He saw her again in his mind, her hands worn, her body tired, but her spirit unbroken. She had whispered to him once, late at night, "Elijah, they can own your body, but don't you ever let M own your soul." The memory made his chest ache. When the hymn ended, silence settled. Elijah turned onto his side, staring through the cracks in the wall. The moon hung low, pale and distant, beyond reach. He wondered if somewhere under that same moon, real freedom lived, freedom with land of your own, food of your own, no whip, no overseer, no debt. He whispered Isaiah's words under his breath, though fear clung to him like chains. One day, walking away. And with that thought, he drifted into uneasy sleep, the shadows of freedom haunting his dreams. The next morning began with the same cruel rhythm, the horn shrieking before the sun even cleared the horizon. The sound tearing men and women from what little rest they'd found. Elijah rose, his body aching as though the bed of straw had been made of stone. He dressed silently, slipping on his torn shoes, his stomach already hollow with hunger. Outside, The air carried a heavy mist, dampening the earth but doing nothing to cool it. Workers shuffled in silence, their shadows long and thin in the gray light. Children clung to their mothers' skirts before being pulled back into the cabins. Another day, another field. Another battle against the weight of endless cotton. Harlan sat astride his horse at the edge of the fields, whip coiled like a serpent in his hand. His eyes scanned the workers as they lined up, each man and woman carrying sacks slung across their shoulders. He smiled then, a cruel curl of his lips as if he found joy in their fear. "Don't think yesterday means nothin'," he barked. "Every day you start over. Every day you prove you worth the food you put in your mouth. You fall behind, you get reminded why you here." His words hung in the air like a noose. Elijah kept his eyes down, his jaw clenched. He had learned long ago never to answer, never to meet a white man's gaze, never to give them a reason. The workers filed into the fields, the rows stretching on without end. The cotton gleamed white in the mist, deceptively soft. Elijah bent to his first plant, his fingers already burning from yesterday's cuts. The sack dragged across the ground. Behind him, empty now, but soon to grow heavy. Beside him, Isaiah worked with quick hands, his jaw tight. The younger man's body still carried strength, but exhaustion clung to him too. His lips moved silently, muttering words Elijah could not hear. Perhaps a prayer, perhaps a curse. The sun rose higher, burning away the mist, and the heat settled, like a weight on their backs. Sweat ran down Elijah's face, stinging his eyes. His shirt clung wet to his skin, his breath ragged. Then came the voice, sharp, angry. "You there, boy?" Elijah froze. The word wasn't aimed at him. It was Harlan's voice, bellowing down the rows. Elijah turned his head slightly, heart pounding. Isaiah had stopped. His sack hung light, his hands empty. He was leaning forward, chest heaving, catching his breath. Just a moment of pause, nothing more. But that was enough. Harlan's horse charged, forward hooves pounding the earth. The workers stilled, every head lowering, every hand trembling. Elijah felt his stomach drop. Harlan swung down from his horse, the whip already uncoiled. "You too tired, boy? Field not good enough for you?" Isaiah straightened, his chest still rising and falling.
Eyes.
His eyes flashed with defiance, just for a second. That second sealed his fate. "I said I ain't hear you beg," Harlan snarled. "Get on your knees." Isaiah hesitated, then dropped to the dirt. Elijah's throat closed. He wanted to move, to speak, but his feet rooted to the ground. The whip cracked through the air, splitting the silence. It struck Isaiah's back with a sound that seemed to tear the sky open. He cried out, his voice raw, but the whip came again and again. Each strike ripped fabric, then skin. The dirt beneath him darkened with blood. The workers bent their heads, lower hands still working cotton, even as their ears filled with the sound. None dared stop. None dared look too long. To watch was to risk sharing his fate. Elijah's hands shook. He gripped the cotton so hard its sharp edges cut deeper into his palms, blood mixing with white fibers. He forced himself not to cry out, not to move. Inside him, rage burned, a fire so strong he thought it might consume him, but he nurture killed quicker than the whip. Finally, Harlan stopped. Isaiah lay crumpled on the ground, his back raw, his breathing shallow. Harlan spat into the dirt. "Let that be your lesson," he said coldly. "Cotton don't wait for tired hands." He swung back onto his horse and rode down the row, eyes hunting for the next weakness. Elijah's chest heaved. His vision blurred with unshed tears. Wanted to lift Isaiah, to carry him, to do something. But Isaiah raised a shaking hand, waving him off. "Don't," he whispered hoarsely. "Keep picking. Don't let him win twice." Elijah turned back to his row, his hands moving without thought, tears falling silently onto the cotton. Every whip crack still echoed in his bones, each one like it had struck his own back, by dusk. Isaiah stumbled back into the line of workers, his body bent but still moving. Ruth was waiting near the cabins, her face hard with fury she dared not show. She led him inside, closing the door, while the others pretended not to see. That night, Elijah lay awake on his mattress, staring at the ceiling. The sound of the whip replayed over and over in his mind. He pressed his fist against his mouth, stifling the sob that clawed its way up his throat. Freedom, they called it. Freedom to starve, freedom to bleed, freedom to be broken in the fields that had always owned them. And still, the whip cracked. The cabins were quiet that night, quieter than usual. The only sound was Isaiah's labored breathing as Ruth worked over him. The dim glow of a single candle flickered against the wooden walls, casting long shadows. Elijah sat in the corner, his fists clenched, his jaw tight, watching as Ruth pressed. A cloth soaked in herbs against Isaiah's back. The boy winced, teeth gritted, every muscle trembling. His shirt had been torn away, and the whip marks ran deep, angry red welts split open, some bleeding, others swelling purple. Ruth's hands were steady, though her lips trembled with anger she dared not voice. "You're lucky," she whispered. Dipping the cloth again could have split your spine clean open the way he swung at you. "You keep still now." Isaiah let out a strangled laugh. "Lucky, huh? Feels like I'm dying." "You ain't dying." Ruth's tone was firm. "Not today, you hear me?" Elijah finally spoke, his voice low. "Why'd you stop, Isaiah? Why didn't you keep working?" Isaiah turned his head, his eyes finding Elijah's in the shadows. Even in pain, there was that fire still burning. "I ain't no mule, Elijah. I'm a man. A man gets tired. A man breathes when he needs to. They want us to forget that. I won't." Elijah's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to say that stubbornness was a death sentence here, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down, he admired Isaiah's defiance. Even as it nearly killed him, Ruth tied a strip of cloth across Isaiah's back, binding the wounds. "You both listen to me," she said softly, her voice like steel under velvet. "Don't let them take your soul. They already talk in your blood, your sweat, your years. But don't give them your soul. That's the only thing. They can't steal unless you hand it to him." Isaiah nodded weakly, his eyes closing as exhaustion pulled him under. His breathing steadied, shallow but even. Ruth blew out the candle and left him to rest. Elijah remained in the corner, staring into the darkness. His mind replayed the moment Isaiah. On his knees, the whip tearing into him, Harlan's voice ringing with cruelty. He felt his own back ache as if struck. He thought of his mother again, of the scars she carried, of the nights he'd heard her muffled sobs when she thought he was asleep. Outside, the night sounds of the fields rose, the croak of frogs, the rustle of wind in the cotton plants. Elijah pressed his forehead to his knees, whispering into the silence, "How much longer?" But no answer came, only the memory of the whip. The next day the workers moved slower. Not because they were tired, though they were always tired, but because every glance at Isaiah, bent and limping, reminded them of the price of a pause. Fear lay thick over the field, heavier than the sun's heat. No one spoke. Even the children working beside their mothers stayed silent. Small hands plucking cotton with desperate speed. Elijah's sack grew heavy quickly. He forced his body forward, though each motion felt mechanical, like he had become part of the field itself. Cotton, sack, cotton, sack. The rhythm kept his mind numb, which was safer than thinking. Harlan patrolled on horseback, eyes sharp, whip dangling loose. In his hand, every so often, he'd snap it against the air, just to remind them it was there. The sound made everyone flinch. Elijah's shoulders tensed with each crack, expecting pain that never came. At midday, when the heat blazed so fiercely it felt like breathing fire, Elijah stole a glance at Isaiah. The boy's face was pale, his movements slower, but still he worked. Still he picked. Every motion cost him. Elijah could see it. But Isaiah refused to stop. Their eyes met for a moment across the rows. Isaiah gave the smallest nod, a flicker of defiance, as if to say, "They didn't break me." Elijah looked away quickly, fear twisting in his gut. He wished he could feel the same fire, but all he felt was the weight of survival, the knowledge. That strength was not enough to fight the system crushing them. By dusk, the scales weighed their sacks again. The store clerk recorded numbers, his lips thin, his tone dismissive. Still behind, he muttered, eyeing Elijah. "You think you'll ever pull your weight, boy?" Elijah said nothing. He swallowed his anger, lowered his head, and walked away that night. When he lay on his straw mattress, the cracks in the wall revealed the same indifferent moon. He thought of Isaiah's fire, of Ruth's steel, of his mother's whispers. Somewhere inside him, something stirred, not yet strong enough to rise, but alive. The whip still cracked. But maybe, just maybe, it would not echo forever. Not echo forever. The ledger never lied, though it might as well have been written in another language. Numbers Elijah could not read, columns he could not follow, red ink that seemed to stain deeper every month. At the end of each week, the workers lined up outside the plantation store. The wooden shack smelled of flour dust, tobacco, and sweat. Its shelves held everything they needed but could never truly own. Cornmeal, beans, salt pork, shoes worn thin, tools rusting at the edges. The landowner called it convenience. Elijah knew it for what it was, a trap. He stood in line with his sack of cotton earnings, Isaiah limping behind him, Ruth leaning on a stick a few places ahead. Their faces all carried the same shadow. Hunger. When his turn came, Elijah stepped to the counter. The clerk sat behind it, a sharp-nosed man with small, mean eyes. He flipped open the ledger, scanning the lines. "Elijah," he drawled. "Let's see you owe for flour last week. And the sack you tore. Shoes, though Lord knows you hardly wore 'em. Balance still red." Elijah clenched his fists. He hadn't bought shoes in months. He hadn't torn a Sakarlin's horse, had trampled it. But none of that mattered. The ledger was law, and the law had no room for his voice. "I need flour," Elijah said quietly, "and beans. For the week." The clerk smirked. "Beans? With what money?" "You're already running a debt you'll never crawl out of." He leaned forward, his voice lowering, full of mock pity. "Man ought to work. Harder if you don't want his belly empty." Heat rose in Elijah's chest. He wanted to slam his fist on the counter, to shout, "I break my back in those fields from sun to moon, and still you starve me." But his tongue lay heavy, his jaw locked tight. One outburst could cost him more than food, it could cost him life. Clerk scribbled something in the ledger, then tossed a small sack across the counter. "Flour, but not beans. Not enough to fill even half a week. That'll do you," the man said flatly. "If you stretch it." Elijah picked up the sack, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from rage. He turned without a word and walked out, the laughter of the clerk following him into the dust. That evening, the cabin smelled faintly of boiled flour paste. Ruth had managed to stretch a little meal into dumplings, feeding the children first. Elijah sat by the fire, breaking his portion in half to share with Isaiah, who was still weak from his whipping. "It don't make sense," Isaiah muttered, chewing slowly. "We pick more cotton than ever. Fields fuller than the river after a storm. Yet we eat less and less." Elijah said nothing. His mind had already gone back to his mother. He remembered the way her body thinned each year, bones sharp beneath. Her skin, eyes sinking deeper into hollows. She had worked until her knees swelled and her breath grew short. And still she had gone to bed hungry more nights than full. One winter, when Elijah was only 12, he had watched her break her cornbread, and half impressed the larger piece into his hand. He had begged her to eat it. She had smiled faintly and whispered, "You take it, boy. You got to live longer than me." By spring, she was gone. Hunger had hollowed her until her heart gave out. Elijah carried that memory like a wound that never healed. Now, as he swallowed the thin meal, he felt the same fear. That hunger would strip him, break him, bury him as it had buried her. Later that night, Isaiah spoke again, his voice bitter. "It's just another chain, Elijah. Can't whip us into slavery no more, so they starve us into it instead." Elijah stared into the fire. The crackling wood seemed to echo Isaiah's words. Chains you couldn't see, but that bound just the same. Chains made of numbers in a book, debts that grew like weeds, hunger that turned strong men weak, he whispered. Almost to himself, a man shouldn't have to beg for bread he'd unearned. Ruth, sitting nearby, heard him. She looked up, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "Don't you forget, Elijah, hunger ain't your shame. It's theirs. They use it like a whip. But you remember you ain't the one who ought to bow his head in shame." Her words struck him deep. For a moment, his chest lifted, as if he could breathe fuller, but the weight returned quickly. Tomorrow would bring the same hunger, the same debt, the same cruel laughter from behind the counter, and the cotton would keep growing. Asterisk, 2 days later, Lyda stood once more at the store counter, the small sack of flour long gone. His belly felt like an empty drum, and his hands trembled from weakness as much as labor. The clerk eyed him with thin amusement. "Back already?" the man said, flipping the ledger open. "Don't see how. You already deep in debt. Got nothin' left to trade." Elijah swallowed hard. His voice came rough. "I gotta feed the boy. Just the little beans. I'll work it off in the field." The clerk leaned back in his chair, smirking. "That boy? The one got whipped bloody? Maybe if you worked faster, you wouldn't both be starving?" A few other workers stood behind Elijah, waiting their turn. Their eyes darted to the floor, their lips tight. No one spoke. To witness humiliation was safe. To protest, it was death. Elijah's chest burned. His fists curled at his sides. He wanted to shout, to slam his hands on the counter, to tear the ledger into pieces. But he thought of Isaiah, still healing. He thought of Ruth, old and fragile. He thought of the whip, the noose, the gun. The clerk's smirk widened. He tossed a single moldy onion onto the counter. "There, that'll keep your belly busy." The sound of laughter came not just from the clerk, but from 2 white men lounging near the doorway, chewing tobacco. One of them spat into the dirt and said, "Look at him begging for scraps. Ain't no different than a stray dog." Elijah's face burned hot, shame and rage mixing until he thought he might choke on it. He picked up the onion slowly, his hand steady only because he forced it to be. He turned and walked out, the laughter chasing him into the sun. Back at the cabins, Isaiah saw the onion and scowled. "That's all? After all we've done in those fields?" Elijah said nothing. He cut the onion into thin slices and dropped them into a pot of boiling water, trying to pretend it was stew. The smell filled the room, but it was thin, watery, more air than food. Isaiah paced, his fists clenching. "We slaves still, Elijah? Don't matter what paper they signed up in Washington. Ain't no freedom if you can't feed yourself without beggin'." Elijah stirred the pot slowly. Silence was heavy. But inside, Isaiah's words echoed true. Every sack of cotton, every drop of sweat, every scar, they all fed the master's belly. Not theirs. Ruth entered quietly, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She laid it on the table and unwrapped it 3 sweet potatoes, small and bruised but bright orange inside. "Traded with a woman from the next county," she said softly. "Don't ask how. Just eat." For a moment, Elijah's throat tightened. The sight of the potatoes felt like a miracle. He looked at Ruth and she gave him a thin smile. "I don't let hunger steal the fight out of you, Elijah. That's what they want." They ate together that night, onion stew and sweet potatoes shared among too many mouths. It wasn't enough, but it filled them for a while. Children licked their bowls clean. Isaiah leaned back, fire still flashing in his eyes. One day he muttered, "I won't stand in no line to beg. I'll walk in a store and buy what I want with money that's mine. They'll have to call me sir." Elijah stared into the fire, silent. He wanted to believe, wanted to let Isaiah's dream light something inside him. But the laughter of the clerk still rang in his ears, and the memory of his mother's thin, dying body still haunted him. That night when he lay awake, his stomach hollow, Elijah whispered into the dark, "Bread. That's all I ask. Bread without shame." But the night answered him only with silence. The field was heavy with silence that morning, broken only by the rustle of cotton stalks and the rasp of burlap sacks dragging across the dirt. Overseer Harlan rode his horse slowly along the rows, his whip coiled at his side like a snake ready to strike. Every so often he coughed and spat, his eyes watching, searching, waiting for a hand to falter. Elijah bent low, fingers raw as they pulled bowl after bowl. His back screamed from the weight of the sack, his stomach hollow from days of thin meals. The sun bore down, and the dust stung his throat until it felt as though he were breathing fire. But then so faint at first it could have been the wind. He heard Ruth humming. Her voice was cracked with age, but the melody floated through the rows like smoke rising from a dying fire. It was an old spiritual one that spoke of rivers and freedom, of crossing over to a land where chains could not follow. The words could not be sung loud. Harlan would punish them for even whispering of freedom, but the hum was enough. Others picked up the tune, humming low. A rhythm built in the silence. Elijah's fingers found the stalks in time with the music, his breath falling into the hidden song. For a few minutes, the weight of the sack seemed lighter, the sun less cruel. Harlan pulled his horse around, suspicion in his eyes. The humming died at once, swallowed back into silence. But Elijah carried it inside him, a warmth that refused to die. That evening, back at the cabins, Isaiah sat whittling by the fire. A small piece of wood turned slowly in his hands, his knife. Scraping with patient strokes, Elijah sat nearby, too tired to move, watching the sparks rise from the flames. After a while, Isaiah held out the wood. It was a rough carving of a cross, crooked but sturdy. "For you," Isaiah said quietly. "Mama used to say, holding on to something helps when the night gets too long." Elijah took it, his calloused fingers running over the grooves. His throat tightened. He had not prayed in a long time, not since his mother's death, but holding that piece of wood felt like holding her hand again. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. Isaiah shrugged, though his eyes softened. "Don't thank me. Just keep it close." Later, Ruth appeared at the doorway with a small bundle. Inside was a crust of cornbread, stale and hard. She broke it in half and pushed a piece toward Elijah. "Eat," she said firmly, though her hands trembled. Elijah shook his head. "You need it more, Ruth." But she pressed it into his hand. "I'm old. You're young. You gotta last longer." "Than me." The words struck him like an echo, his mother's voice, her same sacrifice. Then they did us, everyone to, data did us away. I The cornbread was dry, but it tasted sweeter than any feast. That night, Elijah lay with the carved cross in one hand and the memory of the song in his mind. Hunger gnawed at him, but the warmth of kindness spread like embers in the dark. He realized then that survival was not only in the body, it was in the spirit. They could beat his back, starve his belly, mock his dignity, but as long as someone shared a crust, hummed a tune, carved a cross, the fire inside him would not go out. And for the first time in many weeks, Elijah closed his eyes and slept without dreams of chains. Morning broke with a gray sky, heavy and low. The air smelled of rain, but no storm came, only the endless rhythm of the fields. Elijah rose before the sun, his body aching from yesterday's labor, his fingers raw and swollen. Of cornbread Ruth had given him was gone, the warmth of Isaiah's cross fading beneath the hunger that gnawed again at his stomach. The rows stretched wide before him, cotton bowls gleaming white like ghosts in the dim light. He bent low, dragging his sack across the soil, and the hours slipped into one another until he lost track of time. His muscles burned, sweat stung his eyes, but still he moved. To stop was to invite Harlan's whip. By midday, the overseer appeared. Harlan's horse trotted between the rows, hooves kicking up dust.
Ice.
His eyes narrowed at Elijah, who bent slower than usual. "You moving like you half dead?" Harlan barked. "Cotton don't pick itself." "Faster." Elijah bit the inside of his cheek and quickened his pace, though his hands trembled with exhaustion. The sack felt heavier than stone, dragging at his back. Harlan's voice cut again. "Don't make me teach you how to work. I got a whip just waiting." The crack of leather followed, not on Elijah's back, but in the air beside him, close enough to sting his ear. Elijah flinched, the sound ringing in his head. His body remembered Isaiah's scars, the blood on the dirt, the groans of pain. The others in the field kept their heads down, their fingers moving quickly, pretending not to see. Silence was safety. Compassion was danger. Harlan laughed low. "That's better. Thought I might have to remind you who owns this land and everything on it." The words pierced deeper than the whip could. Elijah's jaw clenched. He wanted to shout, "You don't own me, you never did." But the truth pressed heavy on him. Papers said slavery was gone, but hunger, debt, and the lash still ruled. Chains did not always rattle. Some were silent, wrapping tight around the soul. That evening, Elijah dragged his sack to the scales. His back screamed as he lifted it. The weight was less than he had hoped, and the clerk shook his head. "Not enough," the man muttered, jotting. "Notes in the ledger. Your debt's growing. Keep on like this, and you'll never crawl out." Elijah's chest tightened. "I worked sun up to sundown. That sack near broke my back." The clerk smirked. "Then maybe your back's too weak." "For freedom?" Laughter came again from the men gathered nearby. Elijah felt their eyes burning into him, stripping him of dignity. He lowered his gaze and stepped back. His fists clenched at his sides until the nails cut into his skin. Back at the cabin, Isaiah slammed his fist on the table. "They'll never let us free, Elijah. Don't you see? The law don't matter. The whip don't matter. They'll always find a chain." Ruth's voice shook, but it was steady. "Chains can hold a body, but not a spirit. Don't forget that." Elijah sat in silence, staring at the cross Isaiah had carved. His heart was heavy, the fire dim. He wanted to believe Ruth's words, but all he felt was the weight of hunger, the sting of Harlan's laughter. "The ledger ink that bled like poison," he whispered, more to himself than anyone. "Some chains never break." The fire popped in the hearth, sparks flying, but no one answered. The night was thick with heat, though no fire burned in the hearth. Crickets sang in the brush outside, their rhythm broken now and then by the low bark of dogs from the big house. Elijah sat at the small table, the wooden cross in his hand, his body aching from the day's picking. Isaiah leaned in the corner, his arms folded, his eyes burning bright even in the dim light. He had not spoken much since the scales had robbed Elijah again, but now his voice came low, urgent. "Elijah," he said, "we can't keep on like this." Elijah looked up, weary. "We got no choice." "There's always a choice," Isaiah snapped. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "People run. Some make it north. Some hide in the swamps. I heard of a man made it clean to Ohio." Elijah's chest tightened. The very word run felt like fire on his skin. It was a word you did not say aloud, not unless you were ready to pay in blood. "Isaiah." Elijah shook his head slowly. "You talk in death. You know what they do when they catch you?" Isaiah's jaw clenched. "I'd rather die runnin' than rot in these fields, beggin' for bread that's mine already." The silence between them grew heavy. Ruth, sitting by the door, lifted her head. Her eyes were tired but sharp. "Boys," she said quietly, "don't speak of such things where walls can hear, but don't kill the thought either. Bird never flew without thinkin' first of the sky." Elijah stared at her, then at Isaiah. His heart pounded. He thought of the whip, the ledger, the clerk's laughter, Harlan's sneer. He thought of his mother, giving away her last bread so he might live. He whispered, almost afraid of his own words. "And where would we go?" Isaiah's eyes lit. "North. Follow the rivers. Travel by night. Hide by day." "There's people helping," I heard it whispered at the store. "Safe houses, lights, and windows." Elijah gripped the cross tighter. Part of him longed to believe, to picture a land where no man owned his sweat or mocked his hunger. Fear coiled tight in his stomach. Fear of dogs, of guns, of ropes hanging from trees. Fear of failing, of being dragged back in chains worse than before. The days that followed grew heavier. Harlan's temper flared at small mistakes. Isaiah's sack tore under the weight, and though it wasn't his fault, the overseer's whip cut his back again. Elijah watched helplessly, rage boiling until he thought it might split him in two. That night, as Isaiah winced while Ruth washed the blood from his shoulders, he looked at Elijah with eyes full of fire. "See, this is the chain they'll never take off us, unless we break it ourselves." Elijah could not sleep. He lay awake listening to the wind in the trees, the creak of the cabin walls, the faint sound of Ruth's breathing. The carved cross dug into his palm. He thought of rivers, of stars, of footsteps moving north through dark forests. For the first time, the idea of running no longer felt like madness. It felt like a flicker, dangerous, fragile, but alive. The air grew colder with each dawn, the cotton fields turning brittle beneath the autumn sun. The harvest was nearly done, but the weight on Elijah's shoulders only grew heavier. His sack felt endless, his hands cracked and bleeding, his back sore from bending, but what gnawed at him most wasn't hunger. It was the thought Isaiah had planted the vision of a river flowing north, of stars pointing the way to something more than survival. The idea would not leave him. It burned in his blood, hotter each night. One evening, Isaiah crouched low by the fire, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tomorrow night, when the moon's dark, we slip through the cane fields, follow the creek. North, I heard talk to county's over. There's a man keeps a lantern in his window. Means safe shelter?" Elijah's stomach twisted. "You talk like it's easy. Hounds will be on us before we hit the river. You seen what happens when they drag folks back?" Isaiah's eyes flashed. "And you've seen what happens if we stay. Whips, debt, hunger, till it kills us slow." "Which death you want, Elijah? Fast or slow?" Ruth looked up from her corner. The firelight etched deep lines across her face. "Boys, if you go careful. Don't trust every light you see. But don't let fear chain you to this place either. I'm too old to run, but if I was young as you, my feet'd already be on the road." Elijah stared at her, his heart thundering. Her words both steadied and broke him. The next day in the fields, overseer, Harlan rode past slower than usual. His eyes lingered too long. His voice carried sharper than the whip at his side. "Some of you been whispering at night," he drawled. "I hear things. Dogs'll sniff it out one way or another. Ain't no running from here. This land owns you." Elijah froze, cotton stalk in his hand. His chest tightened. Had someone talked? Was the plan already betrayed? Round him the others kept their heads low, fingers moving fast. But the fear in their eyes was the same. Harlan cracked his whip in the dirt and rode off, leaving dust and silence behind. Elijah's heart hammered, sweat cold on his skin. That night, Isaiah pressed the cross back into Elijah's hand. "You scared, brother? Good. Means you still alive? Fear don't stop. Us it sharpens us." Elijah clenched the wood tight. His hands shook, but inside, something shifted. Fear had lived in him so long it had become part of his bones. But now, beside it, another fire burned. Small, fragile, but bright. For the first time, Elijah whispered the word aloud as if testing it against the night. "Run," Isaiah's eyes blazed, and a thin smile crossed his face. "Then we run." The night came moonless, just as Isaiah had said. The cabins lay quiet, their fires long dead, but Elijah's heart beat louder than the crickets in the brush. He held the wooden cross tight in his palm as Isaiah nudged him awake. Now Isaiah whispered. They slipped out into the fields, moving low through the cotton rows. Their breath shallow, every shadow a threat. Ruth stood in the doorway of her cabin, her figure outlined faintly by starlight. She did not speak, only raised a trembling hand in farewell. Elijah caught her eyes for a single moment, and in them he saw both sorrow and pride. Then he turned, and the night swallowed them whole. The creek's trickle guided them north. The air smelled of wet earth, the grass whispering under their feet. Every crack of a branch made Elijah's blood freeze. Behind them, the plantation slept, but for how long? Hours passed, each step heavier with dread. When the first faint glow of lantern light appeared in the distance, Isaiah's breath caught. "There," he whispered. "That's the sign." Elijah's chest ached. A light in the window. A promise. A risk. They crept closer until the sharp bark of a dog split the air. Then another. Shouts followed, harsh voices carrying through the night. "Run!" Isaiah hissed. They bolted, the world exploding into chaos, tearing through the brush. Men shouting, gunshots cracking like thunder. Elijah's legs pumped, lungs burning, branches tearing at his skin. He heard Isaiah behind him, the heavy rush of his breath, crash of his feet, then a cry. Short, cut off. Elijah spun, heart seizing. Isaiah had fallen, tangled in roots, the dogs closing fast. His face twisted in pain as he shouted, "Go! Elijah! Run!" Elijah's feet rooted to the ground. His brother's voice, the whip's echo, his mother's face all collided in his chest. He turned back. He grabbed Isaiah's arm, pulling with all his strength. But the dogs lunged, men shouting closer, lanterns flaring. A gun cracked. Isaiah's body jerked, then slumped in Elijah's arms. Blood spread warm against Elijah's hands. No, Elijah's voice broke, shaking as he tried to lift him. But Isaiah's eyes were already dimming, his lips moving with his last breath. Run. And then he was still. Elijah stumbled backward, the shouts growing louder. He turned and fled, the cross still clutched in his hand, tears blinding him. His legs carried him blindly over roots, through water, until the river lay before him black. Wide, endless. Behind him, the dogs bayed, voices closing in. Ahead, the river whispered freedom or death. Elijah's chest heaved. He thought of Ruth, alone in the cabin. He thought of Isaiah's fire, extinguished in the dirt. His mother's voice, "You've got to live longer than me." With a cry, torn from the deepest part of him, Elijah plunged into the river. The water swallowed him cold and fierce, dragging him down, pushing him forward. His arms thrashed, his lungs screamed, but he kept moving. The shouts on the bank grew. Faint, the lanterns dim. Whether he reached the far shore or sank beneath the current, Elijah did not know. But in that moment between the river and the rope, he was free.